The morning of August 8, 1832. Edo smelled like it always did in high summer. River mud, charcoal smoke, and the sour tang of too many people packed into too little space. But something was different today. People were moving in one direction, toward the execution grounds at Suzugamori, on the southern edge of the city, where the Tokaido Road met the sea. They came to watch a man die. Specifically, they came to watch a small, unremarkable-looking man, a former scaffolder, a gambler, a nobody by birth, be tied to a wooden frame shaped like a horse and dragged through the streets before the executioner's blade finished the job. His head would then be mounted on a spike, the standard advertisement Edo's magistrates used to remind everyone what happened to people who broke the rules. His name, on the official record, was Nakamura Jirokichi. Nobody in the crowd cared about that name. They knew him as something else. Nezumi Kozo, the Rat Kid. By his own confession, extracted over a month of interrogation, he had broken into more than 100 samurai residences over roughly 15 years and walked away with something on the order of tens of thousands of ryo. A figure so large it strained belief even among the officials writing it down. He was 34 years old. In a few minutes, he would be dead. Here's the strange part. The moment his head hit the ground, the true story of Nezumi Kozo, a debt-ridden gambler who stole because he liked money and hated work, started to disappear. And a different story, a false one, began to take its place. The story of a masked avenger who crept through the night to rob cruel lords and shower the coins on Edo's poor. That story was never true. Not one scrap of evidence supports it. And yet, it's the version that survived. In kabuki plays, in woodblock prints, in movies, in video games, in a gravestone that people still chip pieces off of today, 3 centuries later, hoping the luck will rub off on them. So here's the question worth sitting with as we work backward from that execution ground to the beginning of Jirokichi's life. How does a selfish, small-time crook become a folk hero adored across generations? And what does the answer tell us about the people who needed him to be one? To understand why a thief could become a legend, you first have to understand the city that produced him. Because Edo, the city we now call Tokyo, was not a place built for social mobility. It was built for the opposite. By the early 1800s, Edo was one of the largest cities on earth, home to over 1 million people, and it ran on a rigid caste system that the ruling Tokugawa Shogunate enforced with real teeth. At the top sat the samurai, the warrior administrator class, tied to feudal lords called daimyo, living behind the walls of fortified estates scattered across the city. Below them were the merchants, artisans, and laborers, crammed into narrow wooden neighborhoods that could burn to the ground in an afternoon, and often did. This wasn't a subtle hierarchy. Samurai carried swords. Commoners did not. A samurai could, under certain legal justifications, kill a commoner who insulted him and face no serious consequence. Wealth increasingly flowed toward merchants as the period wore on, but status stayed locked in place by law and custom. You could die richer than your local lord and still be forced to bow to him in the street. Which means that inside every one of those high-walled samurai compounds sat something explosive. Concentrated wealth, protected mostly by reputation and intimidation rather than actual security. The walls looked imposing. The gates looked serious. But once you were inside, samurai households, full of women's quarters, storage rooms, and off-duty retainers who assumed nobody would dare, were often lightly guarded. It was a fortress built to look impenetrable from the street, and a sieve once you were past the gate. Somewhere in that gap between appearance and reality, a scaffolder's son was about to make his name. Nakamura Jirokichi was born around 1797 in Edo's Nihonbashi district, in the shadow of the kabuki theaters where his father worked as a gatekeeper. It's worth pausing on that detail, because it's almost too fitting. He grew up literally standing at the threshold of Edo's theater world, watching people pay money to see heroes and villains perform larger-than-life stories on stage. Years before, he would become one of those stories himself. His actual working life was far less dramatic. He trained as a carpenter and then took work as a scaffolder, one of the countless laborers who kept Edo's wooden city standing and rebuilt it every time fire tore through a neighborhood. It was steady, respectable, unglamorous work. And Jirokichi hated it, or at least hated it enough to spend most of his energy somewhere else, at the gambling tables. Gambling in Edo-period Japan occupied a strange legal position, technically illegal, practically everywhere. Tolerated in the shadows, the same way vice usually is in cities that pretend to be more orderly than they are. Jirokichi was good enough at his day job and bad enough at the tables that by his mid-20s, he had dug himself into serious debt. Debt, in a status-obsessed society like Edo's, wasn't just a financial problem, it was a shame problem. It attached itself to your family's name. His family, understandably, ran out of patience. In 1821, after what accounts describe as a loud, humiliating confrontation, they cast him out. No inheritance, no trade connections, no social safety net. Just a young man in his 20s with gambling debts and a ruined reputation, standing in a city that offered almost no legitimate path back from that position. This is the moment worth sitting with, because it's the hinge the entire rest of the story swings on. Crime wasn't his rebellion against the system. It was his only remaining transaction with it. Once you understand the setup, a disgraced young man, cut off from respectable work, watching wealth sit behind flimsy defenses all over the city. What happened next feels almost inevitable. Jirokichi began breaking into empty homes at night, quietly at first, testing what worked. And what he discovered quickly was that he was good at it, genuinely gifted at reading a building's weaknesses, moving without noise, vanishing before anyone woke up. By 1823, only 2 years after his family threw him out, he had already burglarized dozens of houses. In one particularly aggressive stretch, he hit 32 houses and made off with roughly 751 ryo. For context, a sum that could have supported a laboring family for years. Let's be clear about what this period of his life actually was, because the legend likes to skip past it. There was no ideology here, no targeting of the cruel over the kind, no redistribution to anyone but himself. He stole from whoever was easiest to steal from, and he spent the money on exactly the things that had gotten him disowned in the first place. More gambling, more drinking, more of the life his family had thrown him out for living. It's an unglamorous truth, and it's worth holding on to. Because everything that comes later, the folk hero, the noble bandit, the champion of the poor, was built by people who never knew this part, or who knew it and decided not to care. The city needed a certain kind of story. Jirokichi's actual life at this stage wasn't it. But his luck, like most gamblers, eventually turned on him. In February 1825, Edo's magistrates finally caught up with him. He was arrested in the act of burglarizing the estate of the Tsuchiura domain in Nihonbashi, a daimyo's residence, one rung above the merchant houses he'd mostly been hitting before. This was a serious escalation, and Edo's justice system treated it that way. The punishment tells you something important about how Edo handled crime. It wasn't just about removing a criminal from circulation. It was about marking him permanently and visibly as a warning to everyone else. Jirokichi was tattooed with a broad band on his forearm, the unmistakable brand of a convicted criminal, the kind of mark that would follow him into every future job interview, every neighborhood, every relationship for the rest of his life. And then he was formally banished from Edo. Think about what that sentence actually demanded of him. Banishment wasn't a suggestion. It meant walking away from the only city he'd ever known, his family, his networks, everything familiar, and building an entirely new life somewhere else. Now carrying a permanent brand, announcing his crimes to anyone who looked closely at his arm. He didn't do it. He waited a few months, put on straw traveling sandals, and simply walked back into Edo, posing as a passer-through on the road rather than a resident. Nobody stopped him. Nobody checked his papers closely enough. And just like that, one of Edo's own punishments, designed specifically to prevent exactly this outcome, failed completely. This detail matters more than it might seem to at first glance. It tells us something about the actual limits of Tokugawa authority. The Shogunate could write harsh laws and brand people's skin, but it couldn't actually watch every road into a city of 1 million residents. There was a gap between the system's claimed power and its real reach. And Jirokichi had just discovered exactly how wide that gap was. He would spend the next several years living inside it. Back in Edo, something had changed in how Jirokichi operated. He wasn't hitting random houses anymore. He had a strategy now, and it's one of the most genuinely clever parts of this whole story. He began targeting samurai residences almost exclusively, and his own later explanation for why is worth taking seriously, because it reveals a mind that had actually studied its environment rather than just reacting to opportunity. Samurai estates, he explained, looked frightening from the outside. High walls, serious gates, the general aura of armed authority. But that intimidating exterior was doing most of the actual security work. Inside, especially in the women's quarters where fewer armed retainers stood watch, the buildings were often lightly staffed and easy to move through once you were past the perimeter. Merchant houses, by contrast, tended to be smaller and more tightly packed with people who actually noticed strangers. Less impressive walls, but more eyes. In other words, Jirokichi wasn't picking targets based on who deserved it. He was picking targets based on where the ratio of visible intimidation to actual internal security was most favorable to him. It's the kind of insight a security consultant would charge a fortune for today. He worked it out for free, from the wrong side of the law, purely to keep himself in gambling money. Over the following years, his tally climbed steadily. By one accounting, he took roughly 2,334 ryo from around 70 different samurai households through the late 1820s, an extraordinary run for a single operator, working almost entirely alone, in a city that was, at least on paper, hunting for him. And this is where the legend in the making starts to pick up its most colorful details. Stories began circulating that when cornered, Jirokichi would release rats he supposedly carried with him, sending frightened servants scattering while he slipped out unseen. A trick that may or may not have actually happened, but that gave him his nickname regardless. Whether or not the rats were real, the effect was the same. Edo's residents started talking about a thief nobody could catch, who moved through the most intimidating buildings in the city like smoke through a closed door. He wasn't a hero yet. He was something almost as compelling to a bored, hierarchy-choked city. A ghost story with a body count of 0 and a growing reputation for making powerful people look foolish. For 7 years after his return from banishment, Jirokichi ran. He adapted, he refined his methods, and he kept getting away, which made what happened next feel, in retrospect, almost overdue. On a hot night in June 1832, he broke into the mansion of retainers serving Lord Matsudaira in the Nihonbashi Hamacho district, the same general neighborhood where he'd been born, incidentally, though there's no record anyone found that ironic at the time. This time, a guardsman caught him in the act. There would be no slipping past a checkpoint this time, no straw sandals and a fake traveler's story. This arrest was final, and everyone involved seemed to understand it immediately, including Jirokichi himself. He was brought before the North Magistrate's office and interrogated for roughly a month. And here's where the story takes one of its strangest turns. Because when he finally confessed, he didn't undersell his career. He oversold it. He claimed to have hit well over 100 estates and stolen more than 12,000 ryo. A figure so enormous that modern historians looking back at the actual records believe the real total was probably a fraction of that. Likely just a few thousand ryo. Still a genuinely massive sum by the standards of the day, but nowhere close to what he claimed. Why would a man facing execution inflate his own crimes? It's worth sitting with, because it's one of the most human details in the entire record. Whatever fate awaited him, Jirokichi seems to have wanted to make sure it was for something impressive, that his interrogators, and by extension the city, understood they hadn't just caught some minor burglar. They'd caught the biggest thief Edo had ever seen. Facing the end of his life, with nothing left to protect, he apparently decided his reputation was the only asset he had left worth spending. It worked in a way he probably couldn't have predicted. That inflated confession is very likely the reason the legend grew as large as it eventually did. The sentence, once the confession was recorded, was never in doubt. Repeated burglary against samurai households, especially at this scale, carried the harshest available punishment. On August 8, 1832, they led him to Suzugamori. We open this story here. So let's fill in the details we skipped the first time. The punishment followed a deliberately public, deliberately brutal template. He was bound to a wooden frame built to resemble a horse and paraded down the main street, giving the crowd a full, humiliating look at the man before the sentence was carried out. At the execution ground, he was beheaded, and his head was then mounted on a metal stake for public display. A warning written in the most literal terms available to a pre-modern state. But before all of that, in the weeks of his detention, Jirokichi did one more thing worth mentioning, because posterity would later dress it up as something noble. He filed divorce papers for his wives. On the surface, later storytellers loved this detail. The doomed thief thinking of others even at the end, freeing his wives from the stigma of his crimes. In reality, it was almost certainly a practical legal maneuver, a way to prevent his wives from being punished or socially destroyed by association with a convicted criminal, which was a real and serious risk under the collective responsibility norms of the period. Practical, sensible, even reasonably decent, but not the selfless, heroic gesture it would later be described as. The gap between what he actually did and what people needed it to mean was already opening, even before his execution. And when authorities searched his home for the fortune he'd supposedly amassed, they found almost nothing. A few coins, no hidden trove, no evidence of charity, no secret ledger of gifts to the poor. Every ryo he had ever stolen had already been spent on the same gambling, drinking, and indulgence that had gotten him disowned as a young man in the first place. That empty house is the single most important physical fact in this entire story, because it's the fact that everything afterward had to explain away. Here's the bridge from history into myth, and it runs through one very simple, very human piece of psychology. The empty house didn't read as evidence of a wasted fortune. It read as a mystery. If Nezumi Kozo had stolen as much as he'd claimed, and remember, he himself had inflated the number under interrogation, where did it all go? A city primed to resent its samurai overlords didn't need much encouragement to fill in that gap with the most satisfying possible answer. He must have given it away. He must have been quietly funding the poor all along and simply never told anyone, because that's what a true hero would do. It's worth being blunt about how backwards this reasoning actually is. There is no ledger, no witness, no contemporary record of Nezumi Kozo giving so much as a single coin to anyone in need. The "he gave it to the poor" story wasn't built from evidence. It was built from the absence of evidence, filtered through what an entire class of people desperately wanted to be true about the one man who had ever managed to consistently embarrass their social superiors. That's a genuinely thrilling story, even without the charity angle. But add the idea that he was doing it for them, quietly, secretly, asking for nothing in return, and it stops being a thrilling story about a criminal. It becomes something closer to scripture. A story about hidden justice operating just beneath the surface of a system that offered none of its own. One later commentator captured the emotional function of the legend precisely. Robbing the lords, regardless of the thief's real motives, soothed the public's simmering resentment toward the daimyo, and satisfied a popular hunger for justice that the actual legal system never provided. That's not a description of what Jirokichi did. It's a description of what people needed his story to do for them. Those are very different things, and the gap between them is where the entire legend of Nezumi Kozo lives. Not everyone bought it for what it's worth. Decades later, a Meiji-era journalist looked back at the historical record and pushed back hard against the romantic version, writing plainly that the bulk of what Nezumi stole went toward his own luxury and indulgence, with no evidence he ever gave anything to the poor. But by then, the myth had a life of its own, and one skeptical journalist wasn't going to stop it. If you want to see the myth made physical, you don't have to imagine it, you can go visit it. Jirokichi was buried at Ekō-in, a temple in the Ryōgoku district of Tokyo, and the story of that temple is almost as important as the story of the man buried in it. Ekō-in was founded to honor victims of one of Edo's catastrophic fires, and its guiding principle was radical for its time. Every soul deserved a respectful burial, regardless of class or crime. That single founding idea is the reason a convicted, publicly executed thief ended up with a proper grave at all, rather than an unmarked pit. Because at Ekō-in, criminal and commoner and samurai were treated, at least in death, as equals. As one modern observer has put it, because Ekō-in promised to treat every soul the same way, a criminal like Nezumi Kozo still received a dignified burial, the same as anyone else. But what happened at that grave afterward is where the story gets genuinely strange. Over the generations, visitors began chipping small fragments off Nezumi's gravestone. Not out of disrespect, but as a kind of good luck ritual. The logic, as best as it's been preserved, runs like this. In life, Nezumi Kozo had a legendary ability to slip past guards, walls, and locked doors that were supposed to stop him. Owning a piece of his grave, the thinking goes, might let a small piece of that luck rub off on you, helping you slip through your own obstacles the way he slipped through Edo's. Students preparing for exams and gamblers hoping for a winning streak have both reportedly chipped away at that stone, hoping for exactly this kind of borrowed fortune. It's a genuinely remarkable detail to sit with for a second. A society literally wearing down the physical monument to a man's crimes piece by piece, because they'd decided his greatest skill, evading consequences, was something worth praying for. Nobody chips pieces off the grave of an actual master criminal hoping to inherit his cruelty. They do it hoping to inherit his luck, his cunning, his ability to slip past the things standing in their way. That's not how you treat a villain's memory. That's how you treat a patron saint. Every generation since has found its own way to retell this story. And tracking those retellings is basically tracking what each era wanted a folk hero to look like. Kabuki theater got there first, and quickly. Within a couple of decades of his execution, playwrights had already reshaped Nezumi Kozo into a swashbuckling star of revenge dramas. The 1857 production, sometimes referred to simply as Nezumi Kozo, became an early hit built entirely around this romanticized version of him. Kabuki audiences of the period had an appetite for exactly this kind of story. A commoner outsmarting the powerful, dressed up with enough theatrical flair to make the moral lesson feel like entertainment rather than propaganda. Writers kept returning to him long after Kabuki had moved on to other subjects. Even a literary figure as respected as Tokugawa Ryūnosuke eventually took his own pass at the material, and modern novelists have continued reimagining the story ever since. Each version blurring the line between the actual historical record and the folk hero a little further, until, for most people, there's no meaningful line left at all. Film picked up the thread in the 20th century. In 1965, Daiei Studios released a color film built around his story, casting him as a dashing, quick-witted outlaw. A far cry from the gambling-addicted scaffolder's son who actually lived and died in Edo. Surviving publicity photographs from the production show the character in full costume, mustache and all, looking every bit the matinee hero rather than the desperate man he'd actually been. And the story hasn't stopped traveling since. He's turned up as trivia in modern video games. A pop quiz question referencing his execution date appears in Persona 5, a franchise built specifically around themes of masked rebellion against corrupt authority, which feels less like a coincidence and more like the myth finding its natural home again. Children's novels feature him. Small wooden kokeshi dolls, sold as folk art collectibles, depict him in a bandana with whiskers drawn on. A costume detail that has nothing to do with anything he actually wore, but everything to do with the nickname that outlived him. Every single one of these versions makes the same basic choice. Take the thrilling shell of the true story. The daring, the cunning, the audacity of walking into a samurai household and walking back out with its treasures, and quietly discard the parts that don't fit the hero narrative. The debt, the gambling, the empty house, the complete absence of any charity at all. We're back to the question we started with, standing at Suzugamori with the crowd, watching a small man be led to his death. Was Nezumi Kozo a noble outlaw who gave to the poor, or a cunning opportunist who happened to rob people the public already resented? By now, the honest answer should be obvious, and it's less satisfying than either extreme. He was neither. He was a disowned laborer with a gambling problem who discovered he had a genuine talent for breaking into buildings that weren't as secure as they looked, and who spent 15 years exploiting that talent purely for his own benefit. When he was finally caught and interrogated, he may have even exaggerated his own crimes, chasing one last piece of reputation before the state took everything else from him. He never claimed to be a hero. He never gave a documented coin to anyone in need. The house they searched after his arrest was empty, and it was empty because the money had gone exactly where you'd expect a compulsive gambler's money to go. And yet the thief, in the end, matters less than the thing the thief became. Because the real story here was never really about Jirokichi at all. It was about a city full of people living under a rigid, humiliating hierarchy they had no power to change, who needed to believe. Even for the length of a kabuki performance or the chipping of a gravestone, that the powerful weren't actually as untouchable as they seemed. Nezumi Kozo didn't have to be good. He just had to be proof that the walls could be climbed. That's the real trick he pulled off, not the burglaries, impressive as they were, but the posthumous one. He convinced an entire culture across 2 centuries to remember him as something he never was, because the lie was more useful to them than the truth ever could have been. The lords got their humiliation either way. The people got their symbol. And somewhere underneath all of it, a scaffolder's son who just wanted to cover his gambling debts got turned into a saint of slipping through the cracks, one chipped fragment of gravestone at a time. He was a thief, not a savior. But if you go to Ryōgoku today and look closely enough at that worn, fragmented stone at Ekō-in, you'll understand exactly why nobody wanted that to be the whole story. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this journey into the past, be sure to like the video, share it with fellow history enthusiasts, and subscribe for more deep dives into the people, civilizations, battles, myths, and moments that shaped our world. Leave your thoughts and theories in the comments below. Your perspective might inspire a future video. Until next time, keep exploring history, because the past is never truly gone.